They say the cruelest feeling in life is not hate. It is being invisible. All my life, I waited for someone to see me, to notice me, to tell me that I mattered. But that moment never came. I was like a ghost in my own home, in my own world. People could look straight at me, and yet it was as if I wasn't there at all. I was ignored in rooms filled with people. I was overlooked in conversations, forgotten in memories, and erased from the moments that should have held me close. I was unnoticed even when I was silently begging for love, for recognition, for someone to reach out and say, "I see you." What hurts the most is not the silence of strangers. It is the silence of the people you love. The ones you give your whole heart to, but who can't even give you a second glance. That kind of silence is louder than any scream. For years, I tried to accept it. I convinced myself that maybe this was my destiny. Maybe I was born to be unseen. Maybe the shadows were where I belonged. And so, I stayed quiet. I let the days pass as if they had no meaning. I buried my feelings deep inside, hoping that if I ignored the pain long enough, it would eventually go away. But the truth is, pain doesn't go away when you bury it. It grows. It festers. It eats away at you slowly until you are nothing but a shell of who you used to be. That was me. A hollow version of myself, moving through life unseen, unheard, unloved. Inside, I was drowning. My soul was crying out, even if my lips never moved. I longed for freedom, for someone to notice, for a single voice to rise above the silence and tell me I was not alone. Yet the more I waited, the more I realized, no one was coming to save me. And then something inside me shifted. It was small at first, like a spark in the dark. But it grew. It burned. And one day, it became too powerful to ignore. I reached a breaking point. I could no longer carry the weight of silence. That night, I whispered to myself the words I had never dared to say. No more. From that moment, everything changed. I spoke. I demanded to be heard. I refused to stay invisible any longer. And for the first time, I broke through the silence. My voice was shaky, but it was real. It was mine. And when I finally spoke, people turned to look at me. But their eyes were not filled with love, or pride, or joy. No. What I saw in their eyes was something entirely different. I saw fear. I saw resentment. I saw anger, simply because I dared to exist outside of the shadows. That moment taught me something I will never forget. I was never living in their prison. I had been living in mine. I was the one who locked myself away with silence. I was the one who had allowed their neglect to define me. And it became clear to me, they were never going to set me free. If I wanted freedom, I would have to take it. And so, my story began. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. I chose to break the chains of silence. I chose to rise from invisibility. And though the world still looked at me with fear and resentment, I realized something far greater than their opinion. I realized I was not invisible. I had never been invisible. I only needed to believe in my own voice. And this was just the beginning. When I finally spoke, when I finally broke my silence, I thought everything would change for the better. I thought people would finally see me, finally understand me, finally give me the love I had been starving for. But I was wrong. The truth is, people don't like when you stop being quiet. They don't like when the person they were used to ignoring suddenly finds the courage to exist. My voice did not bring me the acceptance I had hoped for. Instead, it brought me judgment, resentment, and fear. They asked, "Who do you think you are?" They whispered, "Why now?" They mocked, "You were better when you were silent." And those words hurt. They cut deep. For a while, I almost believed them. I almost went back into my shell. I almost locked the door and threw away the key, telling myself that invisibility was safer, quieter, easier. But then I remembered the emptiness. I remembered the pain of being unseen. And I told myself, never again. So I kept speaking. My voice was shaky at first, but every time I used it, it grew stronger. Every time I stood up for myself, I became a little less invisible. I started to see that I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their permission. I didn't even need their love. All I needed was my own belief. My own strength. My own courage to keep going, even when the world turned its back on me. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was harder than being invisible. Because now, instead of silence, I was met with resistance. Instead of being ignored, I was attacked. Instead of being unseen, I was hated. But in that hate, I found something I never had before. I found clarity. I saw the truth. The problem was never me. The problem was never my existence. The problem was the people who only valued me when I stayed silent, when I stayed small, when I stayed hidden. And I realized, if my voice scared them, if my presence made them uncomfortable, then maybe I was finally on the right path. Maybe being feared was better than being invisible. So I kept going. I kept rising. I began to rebuild myself piece by piece, voice by voice, step by step. I learned to stand tall, even when my knees shook. I learned to walk forward, even when every part of me wanted to turn back. Slowly, the cage I had built around myself began to break. The walls of silence crumbled. The chains of invisibility fell away. And for the first time in my life, I was free. But freedom is not without cost. It comes with loneliness. It comes with sacrifice. It comes with the painful realization that some people will never love you for who you are. They will only love the version of you that keeps them comfortable. And I was no longer willing to be that version. So I let them go. I walked away from the ones who never saw me. I walked away from the ones who resented my voice. I walked away from the ones who tried to keep me small. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it also healed me. Because every step I took away from them was a step closer to myself. And in the silence that followed, I found something I had been missing my entire life. I found me. I found my worth. I found my strength. I found my voice. And that was worth more than all the love, all the approval, and all the validation I had been chasing from people who never truly cared. This was not the end of my story. This was only the second chapter. Because once you taste freedom, once you discover your voice, you can never go back to being invisible again. When I walked away from the people who never saw me, it felt like stepping into an empty world. At first, the silence was terrifying. I had spent so long being surrounded by voices, even if those voices ignored me, that the sudden quiet felt unbearable. But slowly, that silence began to change. It was no longer a cage. It was no longer a prison. It became space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to hear my own heart for the first time. For years, I thought I needed others to define me. I thought I needed their approval to feel alive. But the truth is, I never needed them. What I needed was myself. I started to rebuild, not for them, but for me. I picked up the broken pieces of who I was and placed them back together with patience. Every scar, every wound, every tear became part of my strength. I was no longer hiding them. I was wearing them like armor. The more I accepted myself, the less I cared about their opinions. Their silence no longer hurt me. Their rejection no longer defined me. Because I had learned a powerful truth, when you stop begging to be seen, you start to see yourself more clearly than ever. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer a ghost in my own story. I was alive. I was real. And I was unstoppable. Yes, I lost people along the way. Yes, I walked away from familiar faces and familiar places. But what I gained was worth more than everything I left behind. I gained freedom. I gained strength. I gained a voice that could no longer be silenced. And now, when I look back, I don't feel regret. I don't feel bitterness. I feel gratitude. Because every moment I spent in the shadows taught me how precious the light truly is. Every time I was ignored, I was learning how to never ignore myself again. So if you feel invisible right now, if you feel forgotten, unloved, or unseen, know this: your story is not over. You are not trapped forever. The silence around you does not define you. You have a voice. You have worth. And even if the world refuses to see you, you must see yourself. Because the day you do, everything changes. I am living proof. I was invisible once. But not anymore. I am free. I am strong. I am me. And so are you.